we turn around and say there's going to be angles, quick reaction adjustment angles in all these areas, we become cold analytical again and say that who can react quickest to these last second changes may be the ones who take down the pot.
Just COVID in general this year, like, do you think that
Yes.
there's going to be a difference between the way
Yes.
these teams were able to prepare last year, where we saw, I mean, one of the most high scoring years in quite some time, and a lot of that probably had to do with just it was a tough spot from as a defensive player, right? Just jumping right into it without any preseason games, that sort of thing. So you'd think that there's going to be a little bit more of a regression back to not necessarily defensive football, because I know the NFL is just not really played that way anymore. There's going to be points regardless. But do you think that there's anything to this this different type of season and lead up to the season that we had versus last year?
So it can cut both ways, right?
Sure.
This is where we get into things. Joe, we can say things that are true about the NFL, but when we try to apply it to in some uniform way, it just doesn't work. It falls flat, right?
Mhm.
So it is going to affect things. I think we saw fewer preseason snaps on the whole by starters. Now, some old school football types would say that's going to result in, well, geez, September's going to be the preseason, basically.
Mhm.
And it's going to make it harder to get actionable takeaways from these early games in some ways. Now, we won't know until later on which reveals in September were really just a part of a team using September as the preseason and which ones were an announcement of a new reality. But I also think that, lack of preparation or the shorter preseason, we're going to look at teams that have first game right off the bat, Dallas and Tampa Bay. Dallas really didn't get to practice with Dak Prescott. Now, it's the same offense, same players, but does that still mean that there's some rust to shake off? Tampa Bay, Zach Martin, speaking of COVID, he's going to probably miss the game because of COVID. Lyle Collins I don't know if he's truly a game time decision, but we don't know. This first game, we don't really know how healthy some of these players are, even though they may suit up for these games. So for good quarterbacks facing defenses in transition, like on the other side of the ball, Dan Quinn's defense, 5 new starters, at least 5, depending who you ask, against Tampa. Remember, they have total continuity. So you could see a really lopsided game here because of that preseason factor, because of COVID. And Joe, I just got to mention, again, mentioning COVID, and this could be something we could spend hours upon hours, days talking about. But as goes our country, so goes the other institutions in our country with respect to COVID. And in this case, I think that it makes me want to say, shout out and prayers to our man, Mike Tagliere, first and foremost, a member of our community who was fully vaccinated. He's been on a ventilator for over 2 weeks now. He is responsive. He can move as he's sedated on the ventilator. So, all's not lost by any measure. And Mike's a fighter. But COVID isn't over. And in fact, because of the fact that people are behaving as if COVID is over in a lot of places, it may be affecting player availability more than it did last year when we were hyper aware of it. Right? I mean, this again, doesn't this just match what's going on in our country? So already this week, we're watching Tyra Matthew, who was on the list last week, probably was symptomatic, positive. Andy Reid doesn't sound concerned, but remember Myles Garrett, Lamar Jackson, players have said Cam Newton. Last year when I came back, I wasn't myself. They didn't tell us that last year in the context of the season, but they told after the season. So we're going to have to watch that. You've got Austin Jackson, which means that Greg Little could start at left tackle for Miami against New England. That doesn't sound good for Tua, Right. You have John Miller, Carolina's guard, is going to be out. They have some decent depth. Dennis Daly, I think, is going to fill in there. Jamison Crowder is on the COVID list. He's also a little bit banged up. But they're doing a round of tests today. Remember, and I wish the NFLPA and NFL get together and change this from weekly testing because they have all the money in the world. And they can do more frequent testing because they're doing their testing today, Joe. And Chris Mortensen reported that a lot of executives and coaches are very nervous about this round of testing because a lot of players went back to college campuses this weekend for games. So I think that right out of the gate, we all, even though our day-to-day lives may not, except for seeing masks and signs about COVID, remind us of COVID, for those of us that follow football, whether it be for DFS, for gambling, for fantasy football, or just because you love the sport or love your team, you'll be reminded of it this weekend. And, then we turn around and say there's going to be angles quick reaction, adjustment, angles in all these areas, we become cold and analytical again and say that who can react quickest to these last second changes may be the ones who take down the pot.
There's definitely some edge there in the betting markets and DFS, all that stuff. But I'll echo what you said in terms of just all of that. A lot of it is out of our control, but definitely want to pass along my best wishes to Mike Tagliere. Just he's one of those guys in our industry, Sig, as you know, one of the great humans out there.
Yeah.
Obviously, Tabby, his wife, right by his side throughout all of this. Like, is there a better human being than Tabby? I wish him the best. We know he's a fighter. Mike's actually the first person in the industry that I met, which what feels like 10 years ago. But he's one of those guys, like, if you have 100 followers on Twitter, if you have 100,000 followers on Twitter, he's going to treat you the exact same. He's always going to be that person you can call and you can basically ask him anything, and he's going to do what he can to help. So I love Tags, wish him the best. He's going to get through this. I think that all of us are definitely behind him. And then when he gets through this, I'm happy for him in so many ways, because he's going to realize how great that woman is right next to him. And man, what a lucky guy. So I think that we wish the best to his family. If there's anything that we can do, Tabby, if you see this, reach out to any of us. We're all one big family, right?